Hello, in this video I'm going to go over buffs in the Elder Scrolls Online video game. If you did not see my previous two videos, this is kind of a mini series. I started out with status effects, and then I did debuffs, and now I'm doing buffs. So I will link those two videos in the description if you're interested in those. But let's get into it. In order to find these, you need to go to the help screen, just like we've done in the previous two videos. Go into tutorials, and then combat again. And you're going to want to go into name buffs, and this is where you can see all of the named buffs for the game. Now I'm going to go over what each of these do and common ways that you can get this. So let's start off. These buffs are advantageous benefits that you can apply to yourself or your group members to help you get through any of the content that you're doing. PvP, PvE, solo, trials, dungeons, whatever. When you add these to your character or your group becomes more defensive, more powerful, has better resources. It depends on what the buff is and what it does, but it benefits your character in an awesome way. And in most cases, these have a major, which is a more potent, and a minor version, which is typically about half of what the benefit is. So let's get into it. So very first two here are actually first three are defensive. Major Resolve is a very common skill that you should have in probably almost every scenario that you're doing. Anytime that you are walking around more tanky than not, it's gonna make you be able to clear the content easier. Major Resolve accounts for about 9% resistances, and so there is a resistance cap in the game of 33,000, and so whatever armor that you're wearing, and if you've got any kind of racial passives, whatever, depending on what race you are, or what any other kind of additive in, your Mundus could possibly be affecting this as well. But the major version provides 5,948 resistances, and the minor version, which stacks with the major because they are not the same that way, is 2,974. So you can't have two majors, but you can have a minor and a major. So most of these are provided typically by your support. Either your tanks or your healers will usually provide those two buffs in a trial or a dungeon. Maybe not quite as common in a dungeon. Just depends on if you're running veteran, hard mode, or just vet or whatnot. But sometimes you don't need it as much in a dungeon. But if you're in a vet trial, I would highly recommend making sure that your team has Major Resolve and Minor Resolve covered for your group. It just really, really, really helps keep people alive. And that's probably something I'm going to cover in a video as well, is kind of the change in what support should do now. And I think probably one of the most important ones is to provide resistance to make sure that they stay alive, because with the way DPS are built now, doing so much damage, having these two buffs in the group is way more vital, because if somebody's doing 130,000 damage per second and they die, that's 130,000 in the toilet. But it's not just them, it's that other DPS that has to stop and res them as well. So think about if you used to hit 100,000 and now you're hitting 130. That's 160 now, or excuse me, 260 DPS now, what it used to be 200. So it's even more vital to keep people alive and make sure that they're blasting off their offense. So it's really, really important, in my opinion, to make sure that you have major and minor resolve in your group. So let's cover real quickly how you can get major resolve and minor resolve. If you have not seen my video on my off-tank, my Mighty Pearl, my new video on my off-tank build, as well as my review of the Mighty Glacier set that comes out of Frostvault. This is, in my opinion, the best way to go for tanks to provide major resolve to your group. It is very easy to activate. Check out those videos if you haven't seen them. I display in the video exactly how to operate this and exactly how easy it is to have on your build. I go into pretty good detail with those, so I'm not going to spend too much time covering that here because I've already done it in a video or two, and I don't want to be super redundant there. For minor resolve, that is a lot more common. Traditionally, you can get that from a healer that's running Combat Prayer from the Restoration staff line, and that would be the Blessings of Protection here. Base morph gives you minor resolve. Depending on which morph you get, you get it for 20 seconds, you may get it for 10. So this depends, but you can also get it from Scribing. That's another very easy way of getting minor resolve. If you have an Arcanist tank in group that's close to your group, they could provide it with their minor resolve. It hits in an AoE and provides it to everybody. It's just a question of what kind of fight you're in, how easy it is to get, all of that. So I think we've covered that thoroughly enough. You definitely want to make sure you have major and minor resolve in your group. Very, very important. The next up, protection. This is kind of a tricky stat because if you start building into the damage taken category too heavily, then it becomes far less fruitful and it doesn't do as much as you think. So the minor protection is awesome to provide your DPS especially. Tanks usually have this in their toolkit. I recommend scribing the Mage's Guild skill and having minor protection on it. It provides it for anybody that's within distance of the spell for 22 seconds. Very easy to operate and handle. Major protection, probably only needed for super dangerous spots. This is a great source of this would be the Glyphic of the Tides ultimate from the Arcanist, which your healers should be running. That is a very, very powerful skill. All they have to do is heal the glyph up to full, and then it provides major protection. And the ring on that spell is really, really big. So it's very, very important to run that skill, and you'll have major protection for some dangerous situations. But those two basically will reduce your damage taken. It doesn't matter what type of damage it is. Damage over time, direct damage, physical damage, flame damage. It doesn't matter. Any kind of damage that you take is going to be reduced while the buff is on you or your group. So if you are trying to source it on yourself, the best way, in my opinion, hands down, a little bit of a pain, but you have to make sure that you have your assault skill lines up. I believe you have to get to a 7 for support in order to buy this skill right here. And then you have to slot this on your bar, and then it will give you major protection just for slotting the skill. If you're wanting to get minor protection slot in the same manner, and you have your Sigic order up all the way, you can get the ultimate here, and then also slot it on your bar, and then while it's slotted, you'll have minor protection. But again, just make sure if you are stacking into that damage reduced taken, you might not be getting the full amount of reduction that you think you're getting. So test it out. see how much of it you might be able to provide a different buff that is more potent. So let's get into the next level, which is Aegis. Okay, this is only provided by Trials gear that is defensive. These are typically provided on tank and healer sets so that they get a little bit extra resistances. And the tricky part about this buff is it only works in grouped arenas and dungeons and trials. It does not work in Overland. It does not work with players. It does not work in battlegrounds. It does not work in Cyrodiil or Imperial City. So just keep that in mind. If you're wearing a set that performs well in those areas that has this buff on it, it's just going to be kind of not doing anything for you. So just keep that in mind. These are very similar to the protection. It's just got that extra condition to it that it only is effective against monster attacks. So protection works on absolutely everything in the game, from players or monsters. Aegis only works on monsters. And again, if you don't know what monsters is, in this game, that just means it's not a player. It doesn't actually have to look like a monster. If you are fighting somebody in a dungeon that looks like a human, that is considered a monster in this game. So just keep that in mind for that description. That's what monster means. It just means it's not a player. A human player, I should say. So let's get on to the next buff. And very similar to like protection, these next two, Berserk and Slayer, have the same condition of being functional in any content or just trials, dungeons, and arenas. So the Berserk category only works, or I should say it works everywhere. Minor Berserk is very common. You can get that from Camouflage Hunter from the Fighters Guild skill line. This will also often be provided by your healers hitting combat prayer on you. Also, Berserk can be put on the banner, on the very bottom script of the banner. So there's a lot of different ways to get Berserk. It's a very powerful skill, especially Major Berserk. Now, traditionally, Major Berserk has usually only been given by the Storm Atronach from the Daedric Summoning skill line for the Sorcerer. However, I made a video on this, so again, I'll post this in the description below. I got a lot of things to post it now. In the Assassin skill line, the Nightblade, when they nerfed Grim Focus and took away the weapon damage, everybody was trying to scramble and figure out what they were going to do for damage. And the secret of, in my opinion, the answer to that question lies right above it, right here, in the marked target skill. When you choose this and you morph it to Reaper's Mark, what you can do, and I've covered this in a video already, I'll link it again. You mark a target, you kill it, and it gives you Major Berserk for 10 seconds, as well as a burst heal. So this is a very good spot to get that buff. If you don't have somebody running the Daedric Summoning skill line, which, in my opinion, if you're trying to get the Berserk buff, this is a much better way to do it. You're already running the skill line. You're already trying to find something to slot to get the passives. You may as well put this on your bar. It's not hard to run. It's got an extremely large distance that you can apply it for, 50 meters, you can hit this from downtown, for crying out loud. And then it lasts for 20 seconds. So it really, I like to call out that while somebody's covering mechanics before a pull, you can hit this when you're getting the clock down of a 3, 2, 1, let's go. You tag the enemy, you kill it, and boom, you've got 10 seconds of major berserk. So that right there is, in my opinion, the best way to implement this in your group without forcing anybody to use a skill line just for that buff. With subclassing now, I think this is something that people really got to understand and think about and wrap their head around. When you force somebody into a skill line just to provide a specific buff, you are handicapping that person into playing into a certain corner. If you can free every member of your team up to pick the most powerful 3 skill lines for their build, your entire team is going to be untouchable. Stop doing that. Make sure that they can pick their stuff. There is always another way to get that buff without forcing somebody to have to use the skill line. Now, if the skill line is potent and effective and awesome and you're going to run it anyway, by all means, use it. But I don't like having to force somebody. For example, I've done a couple of videos now where I kind of shit on a couple of skill lines, and I know that's probably not the most popular thing for everybody, but I wanted to put out a differing opinion on those skill lines because I don't agree with the broad use of those skill lines. I don't think they're very good comparative to other choices, and I want to make sure that I'm giving good information, and I go through detailed reasons why not to use those. And that's another reason I'm calling out this skill from the Nightblade, is because this allows your team to not have to use a skill line just for a buff. You don't need to do that. Again, if the skill line is good and you're going to use it anyway, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about a skill line that's really lackluster and sucks to run and doesn't do much, but we're only running it for the major resolve, Winter's Embrace, and everything else other than the heal is pretty much garbage. Well, if I can get another way to provide this buff, then yeah, I'm going to do that. Make your team more powerful. Anyway, small tangent there. So let's get back into the buffs here. So Slayer is provided by Trials gear, just like Aegis. The minor version is pretty much on all DPS sets, except for the really early ones that came out from Craglorn, from I believe the Ethereal Archive and Hellra sets don't have minor Slayer on it, but I believe the Sanctum Ophidia ones do. It's something weird. Now that they have all the sets coming out of the trials that they are actually listed on, it's a little bit different. But Major Slayer is provided. Again, this is a weird one. It's provided either by a healer running Master Architect, a support DPS, which is a really common thing now, and what I recommend, running War Machine. Those two sets come out of the Halls of Fabrication trial. Don't have to run it on normal. Veteran. There's no perfected version of those. So if those are sets that you want to farm, hit up your guildies. Check out the group finder. Normal Halls of Fabrication is not difficult at all. Very easy to farm that trial. And what that does is it gives you 50 seconds of Major Slayer, which will increase your group damage, or I should say whoever has the buff, by 10% for that duration. Another common way to get that buff is from a healer running the Rojo combination, which is the Roaring Opportunist set from Kind's Aegis paired with Jorvald's Guidance from the Scalecaller Peak dungeon. That, in my opinion, build is not as optimal anymore because it's not a fun build to run. It's really hectic. You have to remember to heavy tack every 22 seconds, 2 times to give your entire group the buff. There's just more efficient ways to do it. People often call out you have to be in an organized group. I disagree with that. All you have to do, I mean, how hard is it to say, okay, DPS, come over here, we'll stand here. When I call out Slayer, stack on this person here. Give that person a marker, and then you know, okay, this guy here has the green pickle on him, and that's going to be the Slayer guy. Or even if you want to keep it in theme, give him the skull. Screw it. You stack on skull, 3, 2, 1, Slayer. Boom, you give your team Slayer. It's not hard to do that. It's not rocket surgery. I mean, people that talk about you got to be in coordinated groups, if you're not in mic and you can't hear that and you can't follow that, you probably should not be in vet trials. That's not a hard coordination to get going on that. So Major Slayer should be in your group at all times, but I would recommend trying to get it on 2 supports. DPS is running War Machine. Really easy to get that buff in there for over a minute or 50 seconds on one of them and another 50 seconds on another. So that's over a minute and a half for the key people in your group. You don't need to give Slayer to your tanks and healers. It doesn't matter. They're sitting there with 3,000 weapon and spell damage. It doesn't matter if you give them another 300. You ain't going to feel it. In most of the cases, they don't have that many damaging skills. You're going to get 300 more weapon and spell damage on a blockade of frost. Whoop-de-doo. I mean, give it to your DPS. Don't worry about making your healer juggle chainsaws in content. Give them an easier build. Which brings me to another point. Go check out my Dr. Zoran's healer build video. I'll link that in the description as well if you're looking for any of these alternates that I'm talking about. Next up, the empowered buff. This is an oddball on the list because it's not a major or minor. It's just what it is. It's just the empower buff. This has lost a lot of its luster now because the heavy attack builds as of late have kind of lost a lot of their potency. Not because they can't hit hard in single target, but they don't have cleave damage. That's the problem. So ad pulls take longer. If you have just anything that takes more than one target, you're going to have a lot longer fight with a heavy attack build in group. So that is the main reason that they are not effective. It's not that they can't hit hard on single target. It's because they don't have cleave damage. They lost a lot of power when they took away the fact that the lightning heavy attacks no longer hit in an AoE except for the last pop at the end. It used to be the entire channel hit in an AoE, and now it's not the case anymore. So this buff is traditionally provided by the Oakensoul ring. Gives you 100% uptime on that. If you're not wearing the Oakensoul ring and you still want to have that buff, then a very common and easy way to have that is to run something from the Mages Guild skill line. There is a passive that will give you the Empower buff after you cast a Mages Guild skill. I believe it lasts for 10 seconds, but we can verify that, because I'm pretty sure I've got the Mages Guild on this guy. So let me just grab that real quick. Mages Guild here, and the passive is the Might of the Guild, and there it is, 10 seconds. After you cast an ability, you get the Empower buff for 10 seconds. Another thing that Empower used to do is it used to hit everybody in the game, not just monsters, and they changed that as well. So heavy attacks don't really do well in PvP as much anymore. And it also used to do 80% damage, not 70. So they nerfed that as well. So a lot of nerfs to the heavy attack Sorc, or heavy attack builds, rather. I suppose you could probably work some AoE into a heavy attack build, maybe using either a Necromancer or a Warden to get some AoE in there, but traditionally it's run on a Sorcerer with the Sorc pets, and so this buff has really kind of lost a lot of its luster because of those nerfs, and because there are so many other builds out there now that are fairly easy to run, that just do a lot more cleave damage and help mow the lawn, so to speak, in terms of clearing out mobs, which is traditionally what takes the longest in a trial, is the ad pulls. Boss fights are usually only a couple of minutes, whereas the ad pulls take quite a long time because there's quite a few of them, and it usually takes a little bit of time to get them all grouped up and all that. And you stand around and talk about coordination of where you're going to put them and all that. Unless you got a group that's coordinated, then that's typically where people are binding, trading gear, whatnot, repairing gear, using a bathroom break, whatever. Usually right after a boss fight, you're pretty much done with the boss fight and you're on to mob time then. So that's usually the time that takes the longest in a trial, is the mobs, and that's why the Empower buff has kind of lost its luster, is because the heavy attack builds just don't clean them off as well. The next two, Brutality. The major version should be on absolutely every build in the game except for possibly tanks. Although tanks should have it on there just because it's going to help in a lot of different ways that you may not understand. Some of your heals could hit harder. Most of those most heals are scaled off of max health for tanks, but some of them are not. So it depends on what kind of a heal you're working with. So Brutality, in my opinion, should be major Brutality, that is, should be included in absolutely every build, especially on a DPS. We're talking about damage here, and that's what you need to do. And this is a whopper of a benefit. It's 20% increase to your damage. And I'm going to just combine both the Brutality and Sorcery, because these are traditionally provided by the same thing. There are instances, like if you're on a build and you're using either a spell power potion or a weapon power potion, then you would only be getting one of these. However, in most cases, you're going to get both Brutality and Sorcery, which will buff your entire damage that you're doing. So the minor versions of this are unique to two skill lines in the game. Minor Brutality you get from the Earthen Heart skill line from the Dragonknight, and you should have at least a tank or something in your group that will proc this, because 10% increased damage to your entire group is going to be quite noticeable, especially when you start getting into the echelon of people having 7,000 to 8,000 weapon damage, and you're talking about adding another 10% on there. It's a percentage jump. It's not a set amount of weapon damage. So these percentage boosters get even more potent when you're talking about getting into the really tip-top levels of damage. These become absolutely massive jumps in damage, so make sure you got them in there. Again, for the Brutality version, you need to get that from Earthen Heart, and that's very common from a tank, although you could possibly have a DPS that's running Earthen Heart for a unique setup. It depends. Possibly a healer, although probably not as common. I will say probably going to be coming from a tank. Who knows? There's all kinds of setups there that you can run. Sorcery, the minor version, only comes from dark magic And I'm going to tell you, this is probably going to be not present in your group. The Dark Magic skill line is probably one of the worst off right now, and is in dire need of a revamp. My opinion for Sorcerer, they should probably make the Dark Magic skill line the healing skill line, and they need to buff that quite a bit in order to make that the healing skill line. I think they need to do a lot of moving around with Sorcerer to make it a lot more usable for most scenarios. I think it's a complete mess right now. They have the DPS spammable up into the healing skill line of Dark Magic with the Crystal Frags spammable, and they don't have a DPS spammable down with the DPS line in Stormcalling. The Execute is there, but there's no spammable to go with it. So the skill line is all over the place, or I should say that the class is all over the place. So I would say probably do not count on the minor sorcery version, which is the Magicka spell power version. I would not count on the minor sorcery being in your group. If it's there, then you probably have a really unique setup somewhere in your team. But if it's there, great. I would not try to build for it though, because the Dark Magic skill line is really, as I said, hurting. You probably will see this in PvP. I know that a lot of people use Dark Magic in PvP, but I'm primarily talking about Trials groups here. PvP, you can go all over the place with benefits, but primarily talking about the Trials groups here. But in PvP, yeah, you might see it in your group. So getting on down here, we'll talk about Force next. Minor Force, absolutely extremely common. Most of the time is on your DPS wearing the Velothi Mage's Amulet. That is pretty much S tier for DPS right now. And if they're wearing that, then they have 100% uptime on that buff without having to use a skill or to source it from a support. So that is going to increase your critical damage done by 10%. And that works on monsters and players alike. It's not just monsters, it works on everybody. The major portion is traditionally provided in two methods. Mostly this is provided with Major Force if you need it. Probably not as useful anymore because people are pretty much at the critical damage cap, walking around by themselves just about. Again, I've done a video on that as well. Maybe I'll post that just in case people are curious. But Warhorn will provide you the Major Force buff, which will increase your group's critical damage by 20% for the duration that it's on. Another very common way to get that would be the Saxhleel Champion tank set from the Trial Rock Grove. And I've also covered a video on that, so maybe I've got to make a list and remember to post all this in the description. So hopefully I remember all this stuff to post in the description. So those two buffs are the Minor Force buff is pretty much there every time. Major is not as necessary anymore, as I said, because once you get to the 125% critical damage cap, it doesn't do any good anymore. So you can run other stuff besides Major Force that would be beneficial, that you could actually gain something from. There are other things you can gain from Warhorn, for example. You get the extra resources, but just other ultimates might be more beneficial overall. So keep that in mind. Savagery and Prophecy. These two go together just like Brutality and Sorcery do. And what this has to do is these two increase how often you critically strike. Now the major versions of this You have to put this in your build yourself. You cannot get the major version of these from anybody. There is not a way of giving your group major savagery and prophecy. It does not exist. You have to either get this from a skill, or you have to run a power pot of some kind to get the major version of this. So, the minor version, however, works just like the minor version of Brutality and Sorcery. The Savagery buff, which is extremely common and rampant in the game because virtually every DPS in PvE trials is probably going to be running the Assassination skill line from the Nightblade, and all they have to do is cast a skill from that line once, or excuse me, that's wrong. All they have to do is critically strike, and it will proc the passive Hemorrhage. And once that is on, you just increased your entire group's chance to critically strike by 6%. And that is the only way you can provide critical chance to your group, is by giving them either minor savagery or minor prophecy. There is absolutely no other direct way of giving your group critical chance. So it's really important you make sure that you at least have one Nightblade in your group. And I need to correct myself because I've just figured out that I misspoke earlier. So, when I was talking about sorcery, this comes from a Templar. So please forgive me. Minor sorcery comes from a Templar. Minor prophecy comes from dark magic. So, glad I caught that. Hopefully I don't get killed in the comments for people that didn't get this far in the video. But sorcery comes from Dawn's Wrath Templar. Prophecy comes from dark magic sorcerer. Again, forgive me, I'm not doing this with notes. Maybe I should, but that's the way it is. And again, it's a critical strike buff to your group. Just depends on which version you have. You don't have to have both of these in your group. If you have one of them, that's all you're going to need, because it goes off of whatever stat is higher. I know there are instances where it does matter, because if somebody's running a weapon power pot, for example, and you provide them the minor prophecy buff on top of that, then you're not buffing into one category. So that can be a problem. However, if everybody runs something like the Arcanist skill line has the Inspired Scholarship skill, that gives both the major buffs, so that won't be a problem. So the best advice I can say is make sure you're running something that gives you both versions. That way you're not running into that problem. Okay, Mending, very common healing buff that increases your healing done. Major Mending is a little bit more rare because it's so potent. I know the Warden has a passive that will proc if you're healing allies that are, I believe it's below 40% health. Minor Mending is pretty easy to get in the game. There's quite a few sources of that. If you heavy attack on a restoration staff, you will get Minor Mending for a duration. I believe it's 4 seconds or so. So there's an easy way to get that. But that's basically pretty straightforward. It increases your healing done. So you definitely want to have this on a healer. If you're running build, you want to make sure you have Mending in your toolkit. That's really helpful. Next up, Vitality. This is something that healers should be applying with Ozezan the Inferno, the minor version, that is. This is going to increase healing taken as well as damage shields. There are other ways of getting minor Vitality. However, the Ozezan is a very efficient way of doing it. Major Vitality is a little bit more rare. However, I know you can get it with Scribing. It is a single target spell that is a little bit, I'll say it's a little tricky. I haven't tested it fully in content to see how reliable it is, but I know you can put that on the Wield Soul skill and you can provide a single target with Major Vitality. So like if you're healing an Ice Cage, for example, on Sunspire or in Sanity's Edge first boss, something like that, you could put Wield Soul with Major Vitality and then you'll have that buff on the skill. And so, next up, these three right here, Fortitude, Intellect, and Endurance. These deal with your recoveries. Your health recovery, your magicka recovery, your stamina recovery. All three of these majors are coming from a Tripot. That is the purple Crown Store potions that we get sometimes in the daily rewards. Also, you can make the potion with Bug Loss, Columbine, and Mountain Flower. Those three buffs right there should pretty much be used on all your builds to make sure that your recoveries are in top-notch condition. There's nothing worse than running out of resources in this game. That pretty much equates to a dead player. Either you run out of juice for stamina on a tank for blocking, or you run out of magicka for a healer healing, or stamina on a DPS for blocking, for that matter. If you run out of resources, you're probably dead. So keep that in mind. Run your tripods. The minor versions of this, I like to get this from a healer wearing the Zena's Empowering Disc skill. That is a very powerful skill. You just lay it on the ground and it affects 6 players for 30 seconds. They can stand in the ring for 20 and the buff lasts for another 10 after that. Very powerful, easy, tight skill that brings a lot of buffs to it. Gives all three of these in addition to another buff that we're going to talk about here towards the end. But the minor recoveries are just as important, because if you combine that with all the majors, then you get 45% increase to your recoveries, which is a massive amount. Depending on what kind of recovery you started with, that could make your recoveries go into the insane echelon of amounts. So do your group a favor, make sure these three are in your group somehow, somewhere. Most of the time, the major versions, you want to run tripods. That would be my recommendation for most of those. So, moving on to Heroism. This is a buff that will give you ultimate. You get 1 for every 1.5 seconds for the minor heroism. That is very common from the banner. There are some sets that provide minor heroism, but most common way to get minor heroism these days is through scribing with the banner. You can also get it, I think, from a couple of other spells, like the Fighters Guild Torchbearer, I think, provides minor heroism. Don't quote me on that, because it's just not as efficient. I don't recommend running it. The banner is a much better way to do it. If you're going to run the banner, heroism should be the way you go there. Major heroism, if you need this and you're on a tank or a healer, Trample should be the way you get this. I wouldn't recommend trying to shove this into a DPS build. Your support should be providing you with enough ultimate with their methods of what they're doing. So just keep that in mind. Minor heroism should be plenty to keep your DPS firing, and then the major should be saved for your support to fire off their ultimates. Next up, minor toughness. This comes from the green balance skill line from the Warden. And before subclassing came out, this was the tried and true main reason that the Warden healer was requested and needed in trials, on top of the fact that they could give major resolve to the entire group. This was the other reason why. All they have to do is heal somebody, and they would give that person minor toughness, increasing their maximum health by 10%. Might not be that noticeable on a DPS, however, if you're talking about a tank that's already sitting at like 43,000 health or something like that, that's quite a big jump in health. So I recommend that healers continue to use that green balance skill line, because it is a very potent and powerful skill line in and of itself. It's not just this minor toughness buff, but it is absolutely nice to have. The other stuff that's in the skill line is absolutely beneficial, and that's one of the cases where we're getting a buff that from a powerful skill line, and it's the only way to get it in the game. That's the other thing about this. It's the only way to get minor toughness. There are not other ways to get minor toughness. With something like Resolve, you can get that other ways. So just keep that in mind. Evasion. This is a defense from area of effect attacks. Minor evasion is very commonly provided by the Arcanist's tank skill line, Soldier of Apocrypha. All they have to do is cast a skill every 20 seconds, and they will provide it to the group. Major evasion is a 20% buff to the damage from area of effects, which in case of healers and DPS, most of the damage that you take is area of effect. It's not all, but a lot of it is area of effect damage. And so getting these two defensive buffs in your team can really help people stay alive and reduce having to stop and res people. But major evasion comes traditionally from DPS running the front bar blade cloak skill. Not only does that proc your weapon glyphs while you're beaming, but it also gives you major evasion for the duration of the skill. So very, very powerful buff. Make sure you put that in there and get that done. So next up is Major and Minor Expedition. These are speed boosting buffs, and what they're good for is if you're running the banner, and traditionally they had the class script on there, but there's been a lot of talk that switching that to Cavalier's Charge, which will give you weapon damage for every 6%, I believe you get 6 weapon damage for every 1% speed bonus you have. So if you can get your entire group Major and Minor Expedition, that's a massive jump in damage, because now you're talking 6 times 45 is 270 weapon damage just from those two buffs there for somebody that's running the banner and using the Cavalier's Charge set, or script, excuse me. So a common way of getting that, again, is from the assault line and hitting the charged maneuver here. Now, obviously, this is not a cheap skill to run, so you're going to have to be really careful how you use this and who runs it. A healer could use this really easily, or even maybe a support DPS, like I've covered in another video with Powerful Assault to proc this and give your group Powerful Assault weapon damage buff with the 270 from those two buffs right there. That could be a thing. Look into it, give it a look. But let's get going on the rest of this, because this video is getting way longer than I wanted it to be. So, after the speed boosts. And by the way, speed is not just great for the weapon damage. If you have to get out of a mechanic of some kind, it's easier to do so if your character's moving faster, so keep that in mind. Next up, Gallop. Everybody should have this on your build no matter what. It's from the Assault skill line. When you level up your character, you're starting off your character. One of your very first things you should do when you get to level 10 is go to Cyrodiil, do the introduction to Cyrodiil, and get this passive right here. Just the first one. All you need to do is get that, and then boom, you've got Gallop. It's 100% increase, or excuse me, 15% increase to your mount speed at all times. Just do that right when you're doing your character's setup, and then you should be good with that buff there. Now, the very last buff that's listed here is Courage. Now, Minor Courage is quite common in the game now. It used to mainly be provided by the tank set, the Claw of Yolnahkrin. However, when they came out with the Arcanist class, that essentially killed that set into the ground. And if that didn't do it, they covered it even with more dirt when they came out with the Scribing system. So I would recommend, if you need Minor Courage in your group, either have an Arcanist healer skill line that's using Zena's Empowering Discs, or you can get it from a Scribing skill. I would not recommend running the Claw of Yolnahkrin when you can provide the buff with a skill just like that. Now, because this tooltip is vague for this, I will just give you the details on this one. Minor Courage will increase your group's weapon and spell damage by 215, and the major version will give your group 430 weapon and spell damage. Major Courage is a little bit more, I would say, limited in terms of where you can get it. The two most common ways to get this are from a healer wearing the Spell Power Cure set, which is the #1 way to get this, in my opinion. And then you can also have somebody run the Vestments of Olorime set from Cloud Rest. That's the other way to get that. It lasts longer than the buff does from Spell Power Cure. However, you have to have a little bit more experienced group to run that set, in my opinion. Spell Power Cure is the way to go for that, and should be how you get the buff. So just keep that in mind. Anyway, that brings us to the end of the list. I'm going to end the video here, but before I do, I'm going to say thank you very much for watching. I'm going to do my best to link as many videos that I mentioned as I can, and I'll get some timestamps on this as soon as I can as well, so that you guys don't have to sit through this entire video of me yammering on the entire time. You can just jump to whatever you want to listen to. Thank you very much for watching. If you found this video enjoyable, check out my channel for more content. I've got everything organized in my created lists, and I'll see you in another video. Thank you very much. Bye.